to, I guess, the more news-friendly topic, which is the right to disconnect. Now, often heard that people have trouble disconnecting from their phones anyway, but that's not the type of disconnection we're talking about here. It's something a little bit different, I believe.
Yeah, it is. Yes, look, I think that this is something which has probably, as it comes up, and once again, it comes up as a headline, people interpret this in different ways and think it might mean different things. It isn't something which says employers can't, email or send messages outside of working hours. And it isn't something that says an employer can't call an employee outside of working hours. And neither, and probably I should add in terms of some of the other things that are in these changes as well, it's not a criminal offence to do so. The key thing there is that an employee, in some circumstances, would basically be employed in such a way that there isn't an obligation for them to feel that they absolutely have to respond. So if they're taking, if they're on leave, or it's there, or it's out of hours, or it's on the weekend, effectively, employee shouldn't be penalised for not responding. Now, I think there is a few things I think I want to say on that. There will be, depending on the role of the employee has in a business, there could be some employees where, well, look, there is an expectation as part of their role that actually they are required to work out of hours. I mean, I've spent probably far too many years of my working life connecting with people in far-flung places in the globe, mostly the US and the UK, and that seems to be something that even follows me in my business now. Sometimes there will be an expectation that there will be a need to have these kind of calls outside of working hours. Now, usually the advice, rather, I would give in that perspective is to make sure that there is clarity there, and that clarity could come a number of different ways. That clarity could come in terms of their employment contract in particular, and there will be an expectation if somebody is in a role where there is a need for them to be available outside of what might consider normal working hours. They're compensated accordingly. I mean, I think the thought process on this piece of legislation, and as I said, it's just a thought process at this stage, is that this is really down to people perhaps that are potentially in lower paid roles, award level roles, to really aren't compensated appropriately to have extensive contact outside of working hours. And there could be ways around that. There could be ways around that for employers that need that. There could be things like on-call allowances that might be available that could be put and added to their wages. So I think that, as I say, it's a piece of legislative change which is caused a bit of confusion. And I think the thing I'd say as well is that at the moment this obviously doesn't come in until the 26th of August, and I think it'll be, as always when it's new, it'll be interesting to see what sort of things come through and what sort of things get challenged. This is the one, just to be clear, where there is a difference in terms of effective dates. So for businesses that employ 15 or more people, so they don't fall under the small business definition, this comes in as of 26th of August this year. For small employers, it comes in. You've got another year and a bit's grace on the 26th of August, 2025. Paul, any thoughts on that yourself?
Look, I think we're probably in this situation where a lot of, there's a bit of what I call scaremongering going on in the media, and so like looking for a good news story. There's some very practical reasons why you do need to be contacted or contact people outside, and particularly in a small business. the level of reliance is quite heavy at times. So let's say you're in a small business, but you have a dedicated IT person, and
Yes.
something goes wrong. Well, you're going to need to contact them. But if you're making the regular habit of contacting this person during non-work times, and I'm often thinking like in after hours, during meal times, on weekends, unnecessarily for things that could wait, then that's perhaps there's an issue there. But it's a bit sad that we've actually got to have a piece of legislation to govern what I call common sense and just sensibility. But I know it has been abused quite considerably by some employers. But I think we're in this situation. We've got legislation brought in to capture the activities of a small few, but it's going to have some implications for everybody.
Yes, no, I agree, Paul. And I love the common sense approach. Often I hear common sense isn't that common, but it's the impression I hear a lot. So, but yes, look, you're absolutely right. I think that this is not designed to stop people, for the ad hoc sort of question that might come up. This is really designed to stop employers really just continually contacting, and effectively, I suppose you could argue it's down to some employers that may have been contacting employees, regularly outside of working hours, and as always, it comes under this wonderful word that's used in terms of what's reasonable and what's unreasonable, which is this you get this a lot in employment legislation at some very grey areas, which sometimes they're sometimes the answer that might come through if a legal case comes up, they can perplex a lot of people, including some people that are far more qualified in this space than me, and that's been consistent, throughout my career in this industry of once these things go to the courts, you just don't know what might come out. But look, I think we'll have to see what comes out on this in terms of cases that come out. But the real intent really is to try and protect people probably that may have been contacted continuously, you say, for maybe things that are less important. But there are people obviously in a small business that are that need to provide support, and it's making sure that there is understanding that that's needed, and that might mean that there is compensation for people, particularly if they're not highly paid individuals.
So I think there's a couple of points I just want to sort of revisit a little bit, and one is this right. What it's saying is that employers not prevented from emailing or sending a message. Now,
Correct.
I guess where the issue is where they have an expectation that the employee will respond.
Correct.
And I think you need to make it very clear that, okay, just because I've sent you an email on the weekend because I'm working, doesn't mean I expect a response. But then the other question I've got is, why are you monitoring your work email on the weekend? Now, that's assuming that the employer is emailing to a work email address. You shouldn't be expected to be monitoring that unless you're on an on-call basis, and then that would be legitimate. But if the employer is emailing to a personal address, I think that might be an area that needs to be looked at. The second thing there is we've been becoming more and more connected and all the time, and we're relying on our phones so much that we have this trouble of saying no. And we've over the last 3 to 4 years, particularly, our dependence on smartphones has really increased, and it's that hard, not being able to disconnect. Now, how many times have during this presentation have we been tempted to pick up the phone and check what's going on while we're here? I'm honestly, I'm going to say I haven't. But
no, I can hear mine, but I'm just ignoring it.
But I believe that I think the studies are showing that it takes 8 minutes. 8 minutes is about the most that the average person can stand without checking for messaging. So I think we're sort of got into the habit of checking those things constantly, and then now we're at a stage where we've realized that we need to step back from this, and smartphones and all of this is great, but it's actually intruding on a lot of our personal matters. And I guess it's a case of, well, if the employee doesn't have the control to stop monitoring and say no, then perhaps we've got to go back to the employer and say, well, just don't send. Like, I know a lot of email programs and text messaging, if it's not urgent, you can actually set a delay to say, don't send this until 9 a.m. Monday morning. Don't send it on the weekend. Then that way your employee is not tempted to look at it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's actually a very good piece of advice, Paul. I found myself out of choice working on something yesterday, but yeah, certainly set the emails to go out today because I didn't want to intrude on the clients that I was working for on their weekend. They don't need to see it themselves on the weekend, but that could apply for an employer as well in terms of if they have a choice that they, for whatever reason, want to work at different hours, then they've got the ability to set that to go out at a different time. And I think that this almost creeps a little bit into some of the well-being space as well, doesn't it? I think in terms of we've got this scenario whereby our smartphones deliver information to us that we don't necessarily always need to see. But there is sometimes then a feeling that, I need to jump on that, or a feeling of anxiety that might creep in terms of, well, I need to respond to that straight away. And I think that I guess probably this is probably one of the reasons why we've got this piece of legislation that's come through. Look, I mean, I guess as you said there on Paul, so I think probably there are reasons why there are scenarios where perhaps the situation has been abused. But I think that it's an interesting one in terms of it's hard to predict at this stage in terms of what sort of cases might come out and what might be determined to be reasonable or unreasonable. But I think some of the initial advice on this is, it's very much, trying to make sure there is some clarity there, and there is something that's actually specified. If an employer feels that there is likely to be, some form of, need to, regularly contacting employers outside of hours and expect a response, or it should be a clarity to say, look, I may choose to email you at different times. That's my choice as an employer, but don't feel obligated to respond until it's your work time. That could be another practical solution as well.
And so as an employer, if you're trying to implement a safe policy here, I'm guessing that you need to review your employee handbook, your policies and procedures, and make sure that your employees are aware of that, and have some and look, in the absence of legislation, go to your employees and say that this is how we're going to approach this piece of this new rule.
Yep.
And maybe say, well, hang on, is that reasonable for you? Do you have an issue with it? And then listen to them and say, well, hang on, what are the issues that they're having? And are they real issues? And then, it's something that we can work through. I think we've got this overly prescriptive way of, I think that it's a case of everybody's being treated as if everybody does the wrong thing.
Yes.
That's the assumption, I think, that we see in a lot of our legislation, that we'll treat you that you're going to break the law, not that we're going to treat you that you're trying in your best efforts to run a business properly, but being fair and equitable to your employees. But I think we do have this situation where we have this, the legislation is based on the assumption that one person's done the wrong thing, therefore all employers do the wrong thing. But as an employer, you can have those lines of communication with your employees, open them up, make sure that you've got some sensible policies and procedures. And unfortunately, we're going to have to watch this space and see what does come out of the courts.
It is, and look, to be honest, certainly at the moment, I think you're absolutely right, Paul. I think it is at this stage, it is more likely to be a conversation. It might be something that might creep into an employment contract in terms of expectations. But look, it could well be in terms of it might be something that might creep into policies and procedures down the track. But I think, to me, it starts with a conversation and having a sensible conversation to set expectations, really, in terms of what might be happening and what the expectations of employees are. Totally agree. I think that's a sensible approach.